Hello and welcome to this episode of the Housing Geospatial podcast, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything that relates to either housing or geospatial, preferably if there's a little bit of both. Housing Geospatial was formed as we believe place matters for social housing and that geospatial information is woefully underrepresented within the housing sector. This series is around sharing a collective knowledge for those within the housing sector. You can find us either on our group page on LinkedIn or feel free to head on over to our website at www.housinggeospatial.co.uk. I'm your host, Chris Kinnear, and for this episode, we are joined by the data-driven Akhlaq Choudhury, who is the founder of GGM360. Akhlaq, huge thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
So we always start off with the same question. How are you involved in either housing and or geospatial?
So housing, I think my first job was making software for housing associations. And that's before anyone wanted a web. I think the company that I worked for, they thought, let's do something different. Let's build web applications for housing association. And this is when you had ISDN lines. And then I went to some of the housing exhibitions when I was in Harrogate, and the sector, it was just different. So I ended up and I met someone and they said, you're not going to get out of housing if you get into it. So, and I did get out, and I think the person's right because you end up going back in. And it's an exciting sector as well because there's so much that you can do.
I'll tell you what, that's like so many of our other guests that have come on, that, and myself included, we've just kind of stumbled into housing and not really left. So you said you've had quite an interesting career, how you were in housing and you left and you've come back. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I started off in making software, social housing, for a product that no one wanted because it was too early, I'd say, because it was web-based and it was in 2004. And web wasn't the flavor. And then from there onwards, I went to work for different organizations, from repairs and maintenance to actual housing associations. And then I took a bit of a break from social housing and decided to look at other exciting stuff. So I worked on the NHS swine flu pandemic. So we designed all the IT infrastructure processes and the ITIL processes. And then then the recession came around and I decided to move back to the Wirral, and everything that came up role-wise was social housing. So then I took another role, social housing, and then from there it was just like back into the same sector, same people, and it was stayed in the sector, and it was that you just see the amount of change that you can do. So I ended up staying in the sector, even though there was opportunities outside, because I didn't fancy working in banking. And the other side is do I want to move away from where I live? And that's not one of the things that I want to do. So that's why I stuck in social housing, and it's a flexible, it's nice working environment, the sector. I think people forget about that, but
yeah, that's really interesting to hear about being in it, leaving, coming back. Now you've began GGM360. Can you tell us more of the story about how it began?
Yeah, so we started it initially as a on-demand trades platform, and we were looking at it from a point of how can we connect people to tradespeople for reactive work. And we were focusing initially on public, anyone. But then having looked at the sector that we're in, you could see the issues and the delays, or how like the housing associations run repairs and maintenance and programs. So like, you know what, why don't we try and change this? And that's where we started looking at GGM360 because we thought, right, what we can do is provide a model which feeds back into the local economy because you're using local services, and it also provides housing association the ability to flex up and down, which means it meets their demand when there's high volume and they don't have a high cost of paying a monthly recurring fee to a large contractor. That's how we started off. And the vision was always we'll do that and collect data for future. And now we're at the future stage.
So that, I think that's really fascinating. That last point, especially the collecting the data for future use and for enabling providers to understand what's going on. And we're seeing far more data being, I guess, required is probably the best word for this. Especially from the regulator and everyone else coming involved, the ombudsman. So what are some of the so we've talked about kind of connecting tradespeople to housing organisations. What other services do you provide as part of GGM360?
So we look at ourselves as a data platform, and our main aim is to enable housing associations to share data, because we all, from a housing sector point of view, everyone's providing the same service. So they're providing homes to people that need homes. So there isn't much difference in one organisation to another. And what we're trying to do is remove that silo of how we collect information, how we store information, and we want to make it open because it gives us additional benefits. So we get benefits around data sharing, experiences, what's going well, what isn't, and then linking that into other services. So one of the things that we're doing is linking into NHS, for example, because you can identify once you share data, the impacts that your home actually makes to other public sector services. Well, I think that's where we're pivoted to. We want to be able to look at the whole, like, public services as a whole, with social housing being right in the middle, because everything starts from your home. So when you're a child, how you're being, the living conditions, the area that you live in. When you look at statistics, it determines your outcome later on in life. So that's what we're trying to do, and that's what the services that we're providing are around data analytics, you identifying data visually. So when I say visually, I don't mean a table or a graph. Yes, there are graphs, but I'm talking, I live in Liverpool City region, being able to see the properties in Liverpool City region, social housing, overlay that with deprivation, overlay that with the NHS readmissions. That gives you really powerful information because you know where to focus and spend your budget on.
So I mean, obviously talking from a map perspective and a geospatial, using geospatial technology to understand, I think one thing I hadn't thought about was the NHS readmissions. That must be a really powerful tool for the landlords that you work with, because, okay, I can see these residents are being readmitted for these causes. Let's understand what's going on in their property and let's try and resolve those so they have better livelihood outcomes. That must be really powerful for a landlord to be able to see that for their residents.
Yeah, so we're trying to champion that data sharing with, first of all, with local housing associations. So Liverpool City Region Housing Association do data sharing, and then for the NHS, if you think about, they spend, it's not a small amount of money. We're talking billions in readmissions that could have been avoided. So when you look at the stats, it's people going back home to a unfit property. So what we were looking at is, how do we share that with the NHS? How does the NHS check that the property that you're living in, based on the condition that you've come in for, is suitable for you to return home? So one of the things that we started looking at is the repairs and maintenance, and then looking at what repairs have happened or what repairs have been logged, the asset condition, property condition, and then when someone's admitted into A&E, when they provide their address details, we do a lookup against the property when they're getting discharged to see if it's safe, because it's cheaper to keep the person in the hospital than readmission. So that's where we're looking at, but I think the main part is getting people to understand there's a wider picture outside of social housing. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Because I give you the example of the NHS, but it's not just the NHS. We look at, like I mentioned before, deprivation, jobs, manufacturing. It all feeds in from the home. So that's the bigger picture. It's just getting organisations to understand that it's a different way of working.
So we've got a question about data sharing later on, but we'll save that one for a moment, because I think, carrying on with the theme of data, we know social housing has got a sort of not a data issue in a sense, but they've got challenges with data. What do you think are some of the bigger challenges that social housing is facing at the moment?
I think it's imposter syndrome, because we've got legacy systems, and everyone complains about legacy systems and data issues. We've known about it. That's probably one of the biggest, and I think it's the appetite to change. So we talk innovation, but we put in barriers to stifle innovation. There's like many of us out there that are creating different things, providing improvements using technology or process improvements, service design. But when it gets to implementation or actually putting it into piloting it, I think that's where the challenges come. So I think that's where the sector needs to change, really. And
so you feel a lot of it is that kind of data culture, in the sense of, this is it almost like the better the devil you know sort of thing. I know the system's rubbish in the back end. I know I've got issues with it, but I don't want to change to anything because it might make it worse, or I've got to learn something completely new. Would that be a fair assumption, do you reckon?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think it's again, I think people look at it from a risk point of view. And although it seems like it's safer to be with a large supplier and a well-known software, or a software that's been around for a long time, what they don't realize is that's a risk in itself.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's the understanding of it. And from a board level, it's being given that information to be able to drive those changes, because you could have a car that's 30 years old and it's been stored in a showroom for 30 years. It hasn't got electric windows or anything else. And then you get a brand new car that's got electric windows, but you choose the brand new car with electric windows. But what our sector seems to do is still continue buying the legacy, software. Or I think that's where the challenges come, and it is to do with it's safer, isn't it? You feel like you've got a large company that's going to support if anything happens. But I think over the recent years, we know with all like cyber incidents and stuff, we know that's not the case. So, yeah.
One of my favorite lines from kind of a marketing psychologist is it's easier to be sacked for being creative and imaginative than it is for being boring. And what they mean by that is if you follow all the logical steps, if it doesn't pan out, well, you've taken all the reasonable steps and people kind of forgive that. But if you've gone a bit off kilter and you've taken a bit of a risk or a gamble, as we kind of describe it in terms of that risky behavior, then it's like, well, you chose to go against the grain, therefore it's all your fault.
Yeah.
And I think housing's in a bit of that position.
Yeah, you've got to look at it from if you look at it from a medicine point of view, how did penicillin come about? It was by accident. It was even like X-rays and things like that. The experiment, and you came about with something really useful. And I think until the sector starts doing that and understanding residents aren't going to complain if they're getting a service. So it doesn't matter how whether your service is down, if you've got another method of providing them, the access to that service, they're fine with it. So I think it's all about mentality shift. And the other side of it, we've got to look at the next generation, because half the people that the younger generation that I know, they don't want to speak to someone. They want to chat to someone on the phone. If they're not on like a web chat, if they're dealing with something, they don't want to pick up the phone. They don't want to see you face to face. But at the same side, when you look at someone older, like as my dad's age, he wants to speak to someone. So, but doesn't mean we go full digital. I think it's all about using the data, understanding who your actual customers are. I say customers because they're not really, you can't, they're paying their rent.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't say tenant because they're still a customer.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because some housing associations flip between the two.
Yeah.
So at one I used to work at, they did call them customers, and they called them, there was a different term they used, but it was more of a commercial term. And then they realised the residents didn't like that. It's like, well, hang on, we're not customers. We're your residents. We're your tenants. And they've taken that more kind of local approach. But I think, it's an interesting one, that word of customer versus tenant, because I've seen it definitely interchangeable within housing.
Yeah.
Moving on. So this is kind of the data sharing conversation we've had. Loads of your comments and posts on LinkedIn are all around data sharing. And it's like, come on, let's do data sharing and let's do collaboration. Are you finding some individuals or some organizations or a bit of both more willing or less willing? How are you finding the reception to those kind of posts and comments that you're doing a lot online?
I think there are certain organizations that want to do it, but it's getting everyone else to understand the benefits around it. And what hasn't helped, I think, is the new, remember you used to have accident claims companies where it'd be like pay-per claim and no win, no fee. And I think because of a lot of those have come about in property sector, people are more scared probably to share the data because in case something happens. And then the other side is the data that bad that they don't want to share it? But if it is bad, you're better off sharing it and knowing that there's other organizations probably in the same situation and being able to work together to find some common ground and make improvements.
Yeah.
Because until you open up data, then you don't know what you might find. And I think ours must be the only sector that doesn't open up the data, because you look at HMRC, you can access their APIs and access all sorts of information. You look at the NHS API set, again, you can create apps to order prescriptions. You can do that today. You just sign up as a developer. get some details. But within our sector, it's that it's probably more of a, we don't know what's underneath our data, or we don't know what we've got, so it's less risk. But
Yeah.
I'd be flipping it around saying, yeah, we know there's a data issue, but here it is. And then there's less of a risk for someone to be able to go, well, you never told me. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting. Many years ago, in my former employment, we were talking about someone wanted our stock list, and they had to jump through so many hoops because essentially of the commercialization of our asset listing, because their property value was quite high. However, since working there and kind of being more involved in property and everything else, I could probably make a nationwide asset register of everyone by buying land registry data and buying address base, so I get UPRNs for everything.
Yeah.
So this kind of schema where our asset list is worth loads on the kind of black market, and that was always the barrier from my perspective of sharing data. It was the commercialization of our stock list and selling that on. But again, for probably less than 20 grand, I could make every single landlord stock list near enough within about 10%. And that's what I did at my former employment. So I find that's quite interesting. The challenging one, in all honesty, is when, like you said, data breaches, when someone accidentally sends you out their whole tenancy listing. And that does unfortunately happen. And I've seen that.
Yeah.
And that's quite terrifying. But in terms of just actual stocks, so here's the location of our stocks, here's the types of repairs we're doing. In my view, is organisations should be sharing that with each other, especially that. Have you heard of the Shine Collective up in the northeast? So Shine, we had Lindsay Darby talk about Shine previously, and they are a collective of housing associations. It stands for Social Housing Innovation in the Northeast. And they've produced something called One Map. And basically they put all their stock onto that one map. And so the idea is they can share services and information with one another to improve outcomes for their residents.
Yeah.
So I think your message of collaboration is being noted. I think it's just taking time to get more regional.
Yeah, it is. After, you know what, it rings a bell. I'll have to have a look after we jump off, because see what approaches they've taken.
Yeah.
Because it does add so many benefits. But talking about data and stock, we used to have NROSH.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, these are public assets. So if it's public assets, you can see how many properties the government owns, the MOD owns, for example. Why are they owning it? So why can't we see social housing? What's special? Do you see what? So we're not a special sector. We are in one sense that we're providing homes, but in terms of assets, I think if you're sharing it, you're opening up innovation, because you're going to see, like when they opened up the open banking, I created an app to be able to see my bank accounts all in one place. And this was years ago. And this is banking. So when you can do with banking, which is probably the last thing you'd want to share, why can't we do it with our sector?
I think that's a really valid point, and one I'm definitely going to be thinking more about, especially thinking about how we can share banking information. We've touched on it very little today, and it's the realm of geospatial, hence this podcast, but also as someone who's probably non-geospatial, geospatial is still quite important for you.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier on a little bit that you visualize some of the stuff where you interlace maps with indices of deprivation and stock location. How are you finding that gets received by the people that you work with, but also how does that support in what you do and how you present information? and kind of the outcomes for the organisations that you work with?
So from a housing sector point of view, we're not seeing much interest because I think they're not seeing the vision of where it can go. From a government point of view, we've been speaking to some ministers, some other various organisations, and they can see the benefit around it.
Yeah.
So if we've got public services, so what we've done with the data is the reason why we went mapping and geospatial was it's easier to see something than look at a table with a load of data. And one of the things that we did for Liverpool City region is all the properties, social housing owned, we pulled them together, we plotted them out in on a map, and then we linked that in with deprivation, asset health, crime, all different factors. And then we look to see how much money is being spent in each of those areas on a visual. And it was easily identifiable where the links in with deprivation, NHS, everything linked in certain areas. We identified, right, we're spending the money in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So we're spending money here, it's all green, yet there's certain parts when you look at the IMD7, there's certain parts which are like amber, but then in this area, it's red.
Yeah.
And even to the point of the outcome for a child, what you mentioned earlier, we're basically putting barriers in for youth growing up by not looking at this information visually and going, right, these are the pockets of area that we need to actually spend money on. And I think the only way to do it is visually on a map. Visually on a map, see the areas, because you can then go, right, we've got a problem here and it's backed with real data. And then you can start, because you can do all sorts of things now. So what I've done is we've plotted a certain area on a map, like drawing like polygons. And then based on that polygon, we pull out the properties that are in that area that are needing attention. Not just properties, we look at roads, schools, all different elements. We look at healthcare. We look at what issues in terms of health people are having, and then linking that to go, right, the outcome that we want for each of these we want longevity, and we want children to go into, for example, higher education or skilled trades. And to enable that, we need to do these things because we can see historically that areas that do have green areas, as we call them, are better performing. So that's what we're using the geospatial tools for, because everyone can, when they look at a map, they can see what's happening. Whereas when I give someone a table of data or an Excel spreadsheet, everyone's like, what am I doing with this Excel spreadsheet? And no one ever looks at it. And that's what we're trying to do.
I think one of the best bits of advice I've ever got received about reading tables is humans are really good about being able to read about a page's worth of data, which is about 32 rows. As soon as you go beyond 32 rows, we just can't see the wood through the trees. And definitely when you're working at a spreadsheet level, like if you're working in a city where you're looking at things by postcode, I don't know if those postcodes are near each other. Are they far away from each other? Just because they're sequential in number doesn't mean they're next to each other. And then it's like, oh, because I've got one at the top of my list and the bottom, that must mean they're far away. But it could be a loop. But the map does, and you're right, the maps just visualize that and they make it more powerful. And I think it's interesting how you're saying the housing sector isn't quite there yet with understanding it, but government is.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful, because I think from a lot of what I've been seeing, regulation is now going to be starting. How can you prove this information? You do that through spatially understanding.
Yeah. It's one of the other things I didn't mention is you look at your property portfolio on a map, and you compare that with just say health data, and you compare that with your asset health, and you can actually notice, depending on the region that you're in, the weather conditions, you can start seeing trends. And if you look at them on a map and you overlay weather on top, and you're looking for the last 4 years or 5 years, and you're looking at a timeline, you can see the link between the types of repairs that you've had and what you're going to get. So we did some, so on our visuals, we took the weather into account. We start logging what the weather condition was when a repair's logged, so that we could link them to certain trades. If you take areas with sandstone buildings and areas, so they're gonna be susceptible to damp if they're in an area where the weather's raining constantly, or the coastal, and you can identify those trends, and then you can automatically, when you look at linking it with health, if it's a property where the walls are sandstone and damp, there's going to be potential health issues. So there's just a lot you can do, and I think the way forward is visualizing stuff and putting it into perspective, where your assets sit, how do you interact, how do you connect things, and understanding what should you connect, because like I just mentioned there, you've got sandstone building, coastal area, and then you look at your repairs data, you've identified, potential issues, whereas some organizations probably would never think, okay, let's link weather to this, or let's have because I think the other on mapping, don't know if you've seen, you know how you do, photographers take slow, stills where they'll take off the motorway and you can see the light. In the same way, if you imagine having your map, actually the weatherman does it, or weather person, when they're showing you the weather on TV, if you still watch it, you can see they show what transition of what it's going to be over the week. So you could do the same thing, and when you look at it from a map point of view, you can see what's going to happen, and if you're savvy enough, you can run models and then prepare to go, right, what happens if we get this type of rain, or what happens if we get this, or if we spend this amount of money, and you can then run simulations. But yeah,
I think that's really cool, and I don't want to take too much away from that. So I think we'll let the audience kind of ponder on that last point. I think that's really powerful. The analytics part of, here's what's potentially going to happen, this is what we're going to have to do afterward. So we've reached our final question, and this is the one which we've had for a while now, and that is, if you had an unlimited budget, what would you do with it?
I would I would create a free data share model, and I would provide different platforms, visual platforms for representing information and cross organizations. And I think that, and I'd probably tidy up the data. I'd probably invest as well in getting a satellite. So I don't know if you've seen Blue Sky and just getting that visual data, because again, when I've started looking at that, you can do all sorts with it.
Yeah.
There's just so much that you can do with it. So I'd probably do that, and then make the make the platform or make the services available for free. And that's one of the things that we want to do is our social value is giving back to the sector and making improvements, and whether that's by providing the service, because at the end of the day, you've got to make improvements to public, and the only way you can do that is not in a chat. So we were thinking about how do we do this so we don't own certain elements of it, so it's governed and owned by housing association. If you work in the sector, you could be part of it, and then when you leave, you resign, someone else takes, and then it's not, I don't own it, software provider doesn't own it, and we end up innovating as well and making sure we're delivering what's best for the sector.
Yeah,
that's what I'd be doing, setting that up.
I think that's a really brilliant idea to really support improvements for residents and the public. Oh, it's quite a nice, noble one, to be fair. So, Akhlaq, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely brilliant having you on and sharing some of your insights with us. If anyone who's been listening today wishes to get in touch, what's the best way for them to do so?
Email, LinkedIn, so you can contact me on ac@gogetmeit.com, or LinkedIn. There's a couple of Akhlaq Choudhurys, but I think there's only me that comes up in social housing sector.
I can always put your LinkedIn and your email in the description for the episode as well. So that would help as well.
Yeah, so awesome. That's probably the best way.
Brilliant. And to those of you who've been listening today, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to get involved in the podcast, please feel free to get in touch either on our LinkedIn page or head on over to www.housinggeospatial.co.uk. Akhlaq, once again, thank you so much for joining us. And to those listening, thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.